Well, it was funny how it happened.
Yeah.
In the 1970s, 1977 or 8, I was living in Sweden. I was a political refugee, actually, from Britain. And a friend of mine, he was a parapsychologist, and we had investigated a couple of UFO contact situations
Hmm.
in Sweden, and one was in Finland.
Who is your friend, if you don't mind me asking?
He was a chap called Jan Fjällander,
Hmm.
who he's very old now, but he's still alive.
Hmm.
And he came along to my place once with a wad of paper. He was a printer at the time. With a wad of paper, he said, "Palden, you've got to read this." And he had photocopied a book, which was called The Prelude to the Landing on Planet Earth, which was by Stuart Holroyd.
That's right.
And it was the book which was the story of the early beginnings of the whole Nine saga, the first few years, of it. And I read it, and it just went boing. It really spoke to me very deeply, and it really connected me up in some way. That there was something very amazing about it, and so that was remarkable. But then life went on, and I completely forgot about it,
Hmm.
and other things happened. Uh, and then when was it? About 13, 14 years later, I was working as a freelance book editor, and I was at work in a small publishing company, and the publisher was talking on the phone to someone, and he turned to me and he said, "Would you like to work on a book about ET channeling?" And I said, "Oh God, not another one," kind of thing. There was a lot of it going around at the time in the early 1990s. So I said, "I don't think so." So he went back to the call. And I was sitting there, got back to work, and I just got this ding, 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 ding on the top of my head. It's sort of like someone was just knocking on the top of my head. And I said to Alec, the publisher, I said, "Put him on when you finish." So he put me on, and it was Sir John Whitmore. And they were looking for someone to compile a book from all of these transcripts that they had of the sessions with the Nine. And I really struck it off with him.
Hmm.
And so we arranged for me to go and visit him and also Phyllis in Kent. I was in Bath in the southwest of Britain. It was 150 miles away, something like that. And so I went to see them for a kind of an interview. And so I met John and Phyllis, and they asked me questions and did all the normal, we did all the normal things that you would do in an interview. And then we had lunch. And I thought that was it, really. And then John sort of said, "Right, now for the interview."
So did
So
you know?
basically, what was going to happen was that Phyllis was going to go into deep trance and I was going to talk to the Nine.
Oh, wow.
Now, the interesting thing here was that in the year or so before that, I had gone through what was probably the worst period of my life, or one of the two, perhaps,
Hmm.
periods of my life, where everything just went terribly, terribly wrong. And it was very painful, very dark. And so I came into this not feeling very good about myself. So I was asking the Nine, you know, "Are you really sure that I should be the right person for this kind of work?"
Hmm.
They seem to have just decided. But I was kind of saying, "Do you really think I'm the right person?" And they just said, "Well, you're the first person we've met recently who needs no preparation." And that just went dying, that I nearly fell off the floor. And they also said, "Listen, this was something which expanded. It was an idea which expanded as time went on." But they also said, I didn't really understand it when they said it, really. But they also said, "Well, you are of us." I didn't quite really mean what that meant, but I found out later on. And so, anyway, I decided to do it. And so I had a thick wad of computer printouts, like 1 foot 6 thick, uh, and stuff. Oh, and some floppy disks. This was the early 1990s. And so I started work on it. So that's how it started happening.
Wow. So I want to backtrack a little bit. And, you said that you were with them and Phyllis went into trance. And, a lot of the tapes we have, of course, are just audio tapes. And I think it's interesting to visualize, especially somebody who was there in a session. Can you sort of just walk through like
What
what
happened?
kind of goes on leading up to it, and how does that
Yeah.
whole situation work?
It was quite a procedure, actually. Um, she would sit down comfortably, and whoever was present would sit there too, and we would all calm down. Um, and she would just go in, close her eyes, and go into a inward state, and breathe. She would breathe a bit, and it would go on for quite a while. Could be 5 or 10 minutes. Difficult to say, right?
Hmm.
Because you're in an altered state already yourself. And then she would go very, very quiet. You could feel her energy field going very, very quiet. And then suddenly there, there would be a slight movement, and after a little while longer, the nine would introduce themselves, or Tom would.
Hmm.
The whole process would take 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the state of everything and everyone around. On occasions, when it was there, she used to sit inside a cage as well, which was not a cage, a pyramid thing, which had been made by Andrea.
Hmm.
And it was a sort of a cube made out of copper piping, just, that not very thick copper piping, with a pyramid on top. And
I've
so
never
she would
heard of
sit
that.
inside that.
That's interesting. I mean, of course, I've heard of the Faraday cage and how that was used, but I've never heard of that. And I know that's interesting because Buharich, even back to the 50s when he was doing the channelings with Dr. Vinod, I'm sure you've heard about all of those
Yeah,
early sessions, and that the use of copper was also
yeah.
something they were doing back then.
It's it's psychically conductive,
Can you
really.
can you talk about that a little bit? Why
About
is it
which,
why is copper psychically conductive? Or
well, it's also a good conductor for electricity.
yeah,
So that's one of its key properties, is all I can really say. But it's common for copper to be used. Uh, I have a copper thing around my neck, you see.
oh yeah, yeah. Wow.
That's designed in the proportions of the phi ratio.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, it's a sort of a conductor. It would give an added, because you see, the thing is, with Phyllis, um, unlike other psychic channels, she really was being totally taken over
Hmm.
completely. They were taking over her bodily functions as well. And it was quite an operation. And all of the channelers I've known, that doesn't happen. They go into an altered state, they go into a separated state and what have you.
Hmm.
And there will be that kind of transition. But there was something where the nine, in what they said, it's in the book somewhere, in the about channeling section chapter, and they were saying about how one reason why they only worked through Phyllis was basically because there weren't other people who could do it.
Hmm. That's interesting. So who I know Puharich had always acted as sort of the doctor, they say, in the books, and so if during those sessions, if he wasn't there, was there someone else who was sort of monitoring that aspect of it, as far as the body being taken over and problems that that might cause and so forth?
Yes, it would usually be John or Israel Carmel
Okay.
or one of the others who had been there regularly. By the
Mm,
time I came in, they'd been at it for 20 years, you see.
mm,
So they had developed their ways of doing things and dealing with things.
mm,
And also, Phyllis was quite clear about the right time to do something or not as well. There would be times where she'd say, "No, it just doesn't feel right," you know,
mm,
and that was good, you know.
mm,
Um, but she needed containing by one, two, or three people who would act as sort of grounders or energy containers or protectors or, for want of a better term.
mm,
It was part of the the setup. Really, was that the people around her had to be supportive
mm,
in an energy sense and a consciousness kind of sense, and fully present.
mm,
Um, really, I found it interesting because I'm reasonably psychic in my own way. No comparison to someone like Phyllis, but I have, and what I found was that I found myself drifting off quite
mm,
a lot into their energy field. Um, but that was more because I kind of felt at home in that vibrational field. It was like going home. And I
mm.
found that very much when I got to the editing stage as well.
Wow.
Do you want to go on to the editing stage, or is there anything more about
Well, I'm
what we're
curious
talking
just a
about?
little bit more about, that if you remember that session or any of the sort of early sessions where you actually were with Phyllis and John, what what was something that occurred during one of those early sessions that sort of made you feel as though this was, a genuine contact
Right.
situation? Because, I
Yeah.
like to cover the all sides of this, and of
Yeah.
course, there's a lot of skepticism and everything, and I feel I've spent enough time with the material and researching Buharich to understand what I want to believe from it, and so I'm just curious what from those early sessions kind of sparked your
Yes.
interest to kind of keep going with this.
It happened actually on during this so-called interview, because it became really clear that these people were not interested in collecting followers, and they were quite specific about that. And they were also uh, the content, also the things that came up made me aware that this was genuine stuff. And I'm quite discerning. I don't. I'm not gullible in that way, you know.
Hmm,
And I'm even now quite. I have reservations about a lot of the channeled stuff,
hmm,
but there are some which I do have. I do feel are very good.
hmm,
Anyway, so there was something in the quality of the way they answered things, which was good. Uh, and there was something also about free will. This whole business about free will that they talk about,
hmm,
that they weren't coming to save us, and that it was on us to do this business of dealing with planet Earth and its problem. But they would assist, and I was very moved by that. It was compatible with the way I saw things and understood things.
hmm.
And so I got a clear feeling about that during the interview, and it was confirmed all the way through, actually. They aren't interested in collecting followers. They see this as actually a key problem on planet Earth. And they talk about the way that religions have distorted things and diverted people into side alleys and all sorts of things,
Mm.
belief systems.
Yeah.
Um, and this was interesting because in the 1990s, there was a lot of psycho-spiritual marketing going on.
Yeah.
There were some quite successful psychics and contactees and people like that who were, and it was all a little bit glittery and it was all a bit way above things.
Mm.
And I was very impressed by the way that the nine were distinctly not like that.
Yeah.
So it was, so I felt okay about that. And it was confirmed as time went on. And also in the 30 something years since, I've had no second thoughts about the matter, really. Um, no reservations. I don't have a problem with what came up.
Mm.
Um, and I still support and feel good about the material that came forward. There's just actually a few things where I don't have it, and that was in the prehistory section. There are a few things where I have my doubts about the dates they gave. That's
Mm.
the only thing where I have some questions, but in a way, that's not really a big issue.
Would an example of that be like ancient Egypt?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But apart from that, um, and I don't think the prehistory stuff actually was the most important part of it.
Mm.
The important part of it was about helping us understand the current situation on planet Earth and work towards fixing it,
Mm.
solving the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the key ideas which really bowled me over was I was well familiar with the idea that we are not alone in terms of ET civilizations and things.
Mm.
But the idea that we were negatively affecting them was a big one for me. And the way they described what they called bottlenecking as a problem for the universe, not just for planet Earth,
Mm.
because we were depriving the universe of high trained graduates who'd been through a special forces training on planet Earth, a high
Mm.
a high level training. Planet Earth is really kind of big test stuff.
Mhm.
You've got to be ready for this one. It's not an easy world to go through. And so we've been depriving the universe of graduates, of people who have been through that kind of earth training, that education. And it's because people are getting lost in their earthly lives and are forgetting the reason why they came
Mm.
and are what they call recycling, reincarnating again and again, staying on earth and not learning the fundamental lessons that come from a life on earth,
Mm.
therefore not graduating from the training.
Do you think that goes back to the idea of why Phyllis was so important in terms of being one of the people, they chose to communicate through, as far as, because I know just from the research and everything, like they would try other channels and other people and it wouldn't work. And that's interesting to me because there's always that theory that this channel material is sort of made up, or it's coming just from their own mind and they're just kind of thinking it. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because when you listen to the Phyllis stuff, it's so deep and intellectual, and it just seems unlikely that that sort of
There's
sprouted
no way
from.
that Phyllis could cook that up herself.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, so
No
that's
way that I could either.
yeah. So I agree with that, and so I'm thinking it's interesting that maybe there are just certain people who are able to connect with this, and then others can't.
A lot of people ask me, is there more material? When are they going to give us more? Or there are also some people who say that they're channeling the Council of Nine as well, who are around today in the public domain.
Mm,
And all I say to that, and this is what I get from them really, is we've got nothing more to say at the moment until you've moved forward sufficiently for us to give you a new round
mm,
of information. You know, the thing is that planet Earth has not fundamentally changed since the time when they were, which is the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s,
mm,
since the time when they were speaking then. So in a way, there is actually no need to say anything more, because one thing is the actual words they used and the actual details we went through is one thing, but really they gave us a way of looking at things. And it's that, they were continually encouraging us to use our own intelligence, to perceive things as we can perceive them. And they gave us a way of looking at things which you can apply to modern day situations now.
mm.
You know, well, right now, we're going through a new war, what they call a war of choice, in Iran,
Mm.
this being early March 2026. And the Nine talked about things like opposition interventions.
Yeah.
And this is a classic case to divert humanity off the main issues and to disappoint the human spirit because all we see is death and explosions
Mm.
uh, and the suppression of hope and all these kinds of things. So it's the way they saw things which is valuable,
Mm.
but we haven't fundamentally changed things on planet Earth since that time a few decades ago. So there isn't really a need to say anything more.
That's interesting. But speaking of the intervention, I know in the 70s, obviously from the book, we know that they were the group, Phyllis, John, and Puharich were going to different areas, the Middle East specifically. And do you know? Can you talk a bit about what they were doing on in those trips and what the Nine was sort of instructing them and why this could potentially why they were doing this?
Well, I was on one of those. There was one we had in 1992.
Oh,
We went to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in the Sinai Desert. And there were about 15 of us, perhaps, something like that.
you know what? I actually think I can send them to you. I want you to continue the story, of course, but I'm pretty sure I have photographs of that trip because
Yeah,
in the archives, there's just thousands and thousands of photos, but there's very specifically photos of I think 1992 I think,
yeah, I think
and
it was.
it's a big group of people and there's a bunch of photos.
Yeah,
And you're in them, I'm sure.
yeah. And so what we were doing there was we would have sessions. Sometimes Phyllis would do channeling, and sometimes we'd do meditations. And they would ask us to do, I can't remember the details at the time, but they would ask us to do a meditation focusing on, say, Syria or something like that. During which time, when we were doing this meditation, during which time they would be doing their string pulling and their furkling and their whatever they do, but what they were needing us to do was to act as, you could say, energy channels into the planet Earth level of reality. And afterwards, it was rather interesting actually, because afterwards they would say what had happened as a result of the meditation, which is great. It was very interesting, to actually get some feedback. And sometimes they'd say, "Yeah, well, you actually need to work harder on this, like
Mm,
give it a bit more focus or something like that." But there are other times when they'd tell us that they had managed to change something. I can't really remember the details now,
mm,
but so we did that, and then we went on trips to visit certain places, and we would do meditations there too. And so we went up into Israel for a couple of days, and we went to Megiddo, which is
mm,
the site of Armageddon, and we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and we went to the Dead Sea and stuff like that, and
mm,
did stuff there. Uh, so that's what we were doing. It was quite interesting, really.
mm,
I've worked as a book editor, for many years, and so I went home with a whole load of transcripts and discs and things, and started wading through them. And it was a few thousand pages. I can't remember exactly how many. And I had to get it down into a 400-ish page book. Um, so I'd have to be very selective about what came out.
mm,
And so the thing was to go through this whole material, which took ages, partially because it was really a big teaching. It was really, I was learning so much as I was going along.
mm,
It wasn't easy material. And what I did was that when I came across a good chunk, which meant something good, I'd copy paste it into a new file and save it with a thought through um, file name. And so I did that. I just go straight because quite a few of the bits of material were personal things to do with individuals in the group,
mm,
or there were things which I didn't count so important. Um, there were at times, for example, well, one of the things was that the channeling sessions were quite laborious, actually,
mm,
um, because they were always struggling for words. The thing was that the nine don't use words. They communicate directly mind to mind. Our use of words is very much a planet Earth thing. And
mm,
so at times they would be struggling to find a word. And also they had a problem in as much as a lot of the concepts they were giving over to us were way beyond our comprehension because we're so stuck in our traditional ideas about things, about spiritual and other matters.
mm,
And so that was quite laborious. And so I had to go through this material to edit out all the different funny ums and ahs, and they would use the term that of the planet Earth and things like that a lot. And there would be a lot of toing and froing about the meanings of words and things like that. So it was quite laborious stuff. So I had to clean all that up. And so eventually, after about 9 or 10 months of doing this, I'd gone through the whole lot. And I had about 800, 700 or 800 files, computer files with all sorts of stuff in,
mm,
organized in groups, but that was all really. And I went into a sort of a crisis, really. What on earth am I going to do with this? How am I going to do this one? Where do I start? And I took a break and I decided to just start,
mm,
to just open myself up and just start. And I did that. I went to the mountains for a few days and opened myself up, and then sat down at it again and just started with the first thing, or just that one,
Hmm.
And lo and behold, that one was a perfect beginning. It's the one which turned out to be the beginning of my version of the book, the first edition. And so it went on like that. And whenever I was getting a bit lost or meeting up with a hurdle, I'd just stop for a break. I'd sleep on it. I'd go for a walk. I'd take a weekend off or something, and then I'd come back and I'd just sort of start again. But
Hmm.
it was very much a kind of a editing channeling experience, basically.
Yeah.
I felt as if they were making many of the choices or key choices. And I felt it was very much a collaboration between us. And that was amazing. There's another thing that was going on too. That was I lived in a house at the time, which was on quite a busy road in a rather cosmopolitan little town called Glastonbury. And and I'd been quite a public figure for 20 years there. But as soon as I started that work, people stopped coming to my door, the phone went silent, and I was inside this kind of um, sheath or tube. It was sort of like my house was overlighted by a very strong energy field.
Hmm.
And there were just two people who came in through that door. They kind of undertook to look after me a bit, do my shopping and things like that. So that's how it worked for the whole of the year and two-thirds, about a year and 8 months that I was working on it. And the funny thing was that when I handed in the manuscript, on the very day I posted the manuscript to them and sent them the discs and things. This was pre-internet days, remember?
Hmm.
Um, the very day I handed it over, um, the phone started ringing again, and people came to my door and said, "Where have you been, Palden? Have you been away? We thought you'd moved away," sort of thing. It's really funny.
Yeah.
So that was a very remarkable experience. I felt as if I was partially in their world. And again, there was something very, there was a feeling of being at home there. There's a feeling of being in my place too. And I discovered this later on. Later on, I did some past life regressions. It was about 7 or 8 years later, where this regressionist had asked if she could sort of raid my psyche for extraterrestrial experiences, because I'd had a close encounter when I was 22, long before I met the nine. And so we did that. But there was a whole other thing that started up in that, which was about me discovering my relationship with the nine. And it was in a way quite a shock because, I found out in a way that I was a robot.
Hmm.
Uh, that's to say, a being who was ordered. They put in an order for me, and I was constructed instead of being kind of evolved in the way that many souls would. They would evolve from a seed in some way,
Hmm.
speaking physically or metaphysically.
Hmm.
And that was quite a surprise. Uh, and that answered the thing about how they had said to me that I was of them. Now, the nine, though, they're involved with a network and a constellation of beings and levels and civilizations and things, which is enormous and vast.
Hmm.
So this doesn't give particular privileged or unique access or anything like that, but it's very much been something quite personal to me. And since then, all of the major activities I've been doing, which haven't necessarily been directly to do with the nine themselves, although it has in a way, but all of the major things I've been doing have been, in a sense, working for the nine. And
Interesting.
so I've been working in Israel and Palestine, and I've done consciousness groups working with geopolitical issues. We had one group for 20 years. Um, and I've been doing a lot of work to awaken people and things like that, and work with ancient sites as well, energy centers,
Mm,
and with crop formations. And so it felt to me as if it was a great gift to connect with the nine again, because I was connecting with a part of myself. Uh, and yeah, so it was quite a major thing, you know. That
yeah.
happened for me. I was in my 40s when that
Mm,
happened.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is just so interesting. We can wrap this up. I just wanted to ask, looking back, what do you think now in terms of what's happening in the world,
Uh,
again in the Middle East? And, what do you think looking back we can sort of learn about what you went through, the nine in general, and how that might be able to help us sort of get through this next phase, if you will?
oh, well, that's rather a big question, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
uh, we just got to keep on working. I mean, it's been interesting for me because I'm in the last period of my life now, and I've been involved in the movement ever since I was 16. I grew up in Liverpool in the 1960s, and all that. So I started early. And one of the things that happened when I was about 20, I was standing on top of a mountain and I made this resolution to work for world change, and with the prayer that I would see results during my lifetime. And of course, one of the interesting things that's happening, because I have cancer, and I have a limited shelf life now, and I'm coughing like crazy at the moment. Please excuse that. But one of the things that's happened there is that I've lost the thread. Um, oh yes, that history moves at its own pace, and it's not going to. It's that change has not come about in my lifetime,
Mm,
although some changes have, and I have managed to make my own contribution to that. I've got a reasonably good track record, and I'm reasonably happy with what I've done, sort of. Uh, so it's a big one, and planet Earth is really on a knife edge. And I think what the nine would call the opposition, the obstructors, are really having a field day at the moment. They really are clamping down, and they have their agents. Mr. Trump is one good example, but he's not the only one, who basically turned down the screws on the control factors
mm,
that block the necessary changes. Um, and they're dominating the predominant consciousness level of people on planet Earth, even though the majority of people on planet Earth are good souls and are quite awake to a lot of things, if only they had time and opportunity to give it attention.
mm,
I think one of the key things, though, is regarding the future. It's all about resonance. One thing I learned through with the nine, but it's something to do with energy as well. That is that when you can get into a harmonic resonance field, say in a group meditating together or working with each other,
mm,
when you get into a field where that group starts operating as one, then the rules start changing. And you can get these things called miracles. You can get things happen which uh, break the rules. And I've had plenty of examples of this in the work that I've done with big gatherings and camps and retreats and things like that, where quite remarkable things have happened. Quite remarkable, including not only locally to where we were, but including with quite distant events and situations, you know.
Mm.
And so the issue here is that the opposition managed to maintain control over planet Earth by fostering dissonance, energy disresonance,
Mm.
where everyone and everything is fighting, you know, where people are bombing one another, where people hate one another, people misunderstand one another, where the finer things in life are just planed out by the violence and the degradation of things like war.
Mm.
And so the thing is that we've got to, if we're going to really succeed on planet Earth, we've got to get to a state of resonance, of planetary resonance. And that is possible. We have had some instances of that where
Mm.
sufficient people move on to a certain kind of wavelength of thinking where suddenly it kind of changes history. And one of the reasons why we're getting all this stuff at the moment, you know, like they're calling the current war against Iran as a war of choice. It's that bad.
Mm.
It's not a war of necessity, it's a war of choice. And it's a choice because it keeps the lid on human consciousness. So humanity needs to come to a point, and when and how this will be, I do not know. This is the big question which has bugged revolutionaries and people involved in transformation for decades and centuries.
Mm.
But if we can get to a certain stage where there's a sufficient resonance in humanity, either through an outburst of kind of love or through an outburst of kind of fear, the fear of getting wiped out, and the bottom line statement which says, I want to live.
Mm.
And so we are in a very interesting time, and the nine are doing their best. But the problem is that the opposition do have a strong control. But on the other hand, I'm still an optimist. Uh, and and I still think humanity has it in itself to do this sometime, but
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's no longer in a way up to me
Yeah.
because I'm on my way out, and I might or might not come back. I don't know. I'll see about that when we get there.